So it's my pleasure to welcome to the podium Peter Werner and Marlow Gates, broom makers. They both learned broom making from Marlow's father, Ralph Gates. In 1973, Ralph left his job as a software systems engineer at the Kennedy Space Program to apprentice with legendary Appalachian broom maker Lee Pop Ogle when Marlow was a young boy. Ralph chose a new career in traditional broom making as a way to spend more time with his family. Peter learned to make brooms at the Folk Art Center in Asheville, North Carolina, where the traditional arts of Appalachia are preserved and passed on to new generations of folk artists, as you just saw during lunch. Peter combines broom making with his passion for rivers, where he collects sticks and driftwood to use as broom handles. Of his work, Peter says, quote, "I think the uniqueness of each of the wooden-handled brooms that I make makes a statement of where I've been in my life," end quote. So without further ado, if everyone could give a big round of applause to Peter Werner and Marlow Gates.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Marlow Gates, and this is my esteemed colleague, Peter Werner. We're going to talk a little bit about broom making, how we learned broom making, and a little bit about the history of brooms and broom making in this area, and a little bit about my father as well, who kind of got a lot of us started in this craft. So, without further ado, let's talk a little bit about this material that we use, and we'll go from there. So, is some homegrown broom corn straight out of my garden, and it's a heritage red variety that grows really well here in the mountains, and it's some people call it a Hungarian strain of broom corn. We're not exactly sure the origins of broom corn. There is a lot of myth and folklore about it, and we do know that broom corn started to appear in this country and in the 1700s, and Benjamin Franklin had a little bit to do with that, and a lot of people give him a lot of credit for bringing it, but the only information we can find about broom corn and where it came from happens to do with a few letters that he wrote, and he talks about getting the seeds from Virginia, and but a lot of folks, there's an article written here that I brought that has some contradictory information, and but the single source that we have of Ben's own writing says that he got the seeds from Virginia, but some folks think he got the seeds from England. Some books say that he got it from Hungary, and Ben was pretty well traveled, so it's not out of the possibility. But however he got the seeds, he was a big promoter of it, and he wrote letters, and he encouraged people to start planting broom corn. So Ben was one of the first Johnny broom corn seeds, and trying to get people to plant and use this material. I think it's a really unique material, the fact that it's very durable, but it still has fine bristles, and it works really well. Traditionally, folks used whatever they had available. Brooms have been around for millennia. As soon as there was a place to live, there was a need to clean it. And so a lot of brooms were handmade out of twigs, out of palm fronds, out of whatever material was available. Around here, broom sage was really popular. And up north, birch twigs. In England, the traditional besom brooms, the besom brooms, were made from twigs, very simply wrapped and then a stick pounded in. Whatever material you could find could be used for a broom. But this broom corn kind of revolutionized the process and made brooms a little bit what we have today, and made them strong and durable, and allowed brooms to transform from a craft to an art form. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So, Peter, we want to start a little bit and talk about your story and how you got started.
Okay, I got started by taking a broom corn workshop right here at the Folk Art Center from Ralph Gates, Marlow's father, in 1995. And the story I'd like to tell about Ralph Gates is, he said, "You know how to make a broom flat, don't you?" And I said, "No. You put the broom on the ground and you stomp on it, and then it's flat." But to me, he also used a press, which is one of these items, to make the broom flat. So, Ralph taught me how to make the handled brooms, and this is the very, very first broom that I made that Ralph taught me in 1995. I came here a year or so later and learned how to make all the small brooms from a man by the name of Carlson Tuttle, who no longer makes brooms. In fact, he may have passed away, but at the time he lived here near Burnsville, and then half of the year in Belize, where he lived and made hairpin lace and brooms and hats and different kinds of things with his hands. But Carlson taught me how to make all the small brooms, and as you can see, they go from something like this, which is a simple whisk broom that I call a duster or table brush, to clean up messes, crumbs off the table, and also cat hair and dog hair off of your clothes or off of your furniture. This is the same broom, only it is sewn flat and might be called a whisk broom. From there, brooms get to be a little bit more complicated in the sense that there are 9 sections to a broom, and this is asymmetrical. You start here and add, but they all go on one side. And so this is called a turkey wing, and is part of the Southern Highland craft tradition. This broom and this broom are exactly the same in the sense that there are 9 sections. You start here, add, just like you add here, but when you add the section here, you bend it, and so it is called a fanned turkey wing, fanned turkey wing. And then this broom is the same as this broom, except that it's a little bit more decorative in the sense that I plait or plate the handle to it, and it just becomes a little bit more fancy. So all 3 brooms are the same, and this broom is symmetrical, unlike the asymmetrical brooms. Again, there are 9 sections, start here, but when you begin adding sections, you put half on one side, half on the other, so it becomes a symmetrical broom. Same fiber, same process, but symmetrical versus asymmetrical. And when we do a break, I would invite you to come up and look at some of the pictures that show some of the history of broom making and different ways to use a broom. Some of the Indonesian pictures show people sweeping the street with a palm frond. Up on the board here, you see different kinds of broom corn. This is an original broom. This one is also made out of broom corn, but with a little tag on it is from Berea, Kentucky, which has been mentioned by Janet this morning. And these brooms, this one, are made out of a different fiber that is made out of rice rather than the typical sorghum broom. So different kinds, different styles, different sources of material.
Very good. So you can tell we have lots of different brooms and lots of different materials. Now, a little bit about my dad. So my dad really was a rocket scientist. He was working for Grumman Aerospace from the early 60s to 1972. In 1972, the last Apollo mission, Apollo 17, wrapped up, and Dad had a pretty stressful career. He loved his job, but he was working 80-hour weeks, and my father never got to spend a whole lot of time with us kids, and he was constantly exhausted. The stress was just slowly killing him. And as much as he loved the aerospace industry, it was time to do something different. He just didn't know what yet. So he had a niece of his was living in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, and she noted, she was working for a potter, and she noted that the broom maker down the road had a heart attack, and he was looking for an apprentice. And she says, why don't you come up here on vacation, bring the family, and meet this Mr. Ogle here in Gatlinburg, and maybe you can see if you like broom making. Well, Dad kind of skeptically said, all right, I'll come on up. And he got to Mr. Ogle's old log cabin broom shop. Out on Glades Road outside of Gatlinburg, there was a little artist community with potteries and wood shops. And Mr. Ogle had taken the brooms that he had learned from his grandmother. He was a school teacher, retired, and he had opened up his grandmother's log cabin on the side of the road and basically was selling the brooms to the tourists. And he made some of the first fancy brooms where he took vine-wrapped sticks and would sell those for a little bit more. He also came up with the idea of a double broom. At least we have pictures of him. Later on you can see I've got a National Geographic from 1968 with Mr. Lee Ogle holding a double broom. It was a wonderful article about the Great Smoky Mountain National Park, and they mentioned some of the local artists and just happened to have a picture of him. So Dad tried his hand at broom making under Mr. Ogle's tutelage and just fell in love with it, fell in love with the mountains. Literally 2 weeks later, came back home to Florida where we were living, got a U-Haul, the entire family, finished up his work and moved the whole family to the mountains, went from rocket scientist to a broom maker's apprentice. And believe it or not, nobody thought he was too crazy, but there were some people asked what my mom thought about that, and honestly, she was very supportive. She was just glad to have Dad back in the family picture, because he'd been, gone all the time. And literally, we'd come home on weekends, and that strange man asleep on the couch, who's that? That's your dad. Okay, if you say so. He decided it was better to do something else. So Dad was a bit of a decade late, but he let his beard grow long. He wore overalls. He looked like the old mountain man very quickly. And until he opened his mouth, you would never suspect that he had, his degrees in mathematics and really was a rocket scientist. But he was so much happier making brooms. And he was one of the first to start exploring brooms as an art form. And a lot of craft, goes from a simple craft that everybody needs, a functional bowl. For example, in pottery, you've got a bowl, you've got a mug, you've got tools that you need to use. Well, eventually there is a master artisan, someone who has better clay, better materials, better access, and new techniques. And eventually they attract apprentices. And apprentices can do the day-to-day work while they're learning and do the bowls and the cups, and it frees the master up to make beautiful items, vases and urns and things that are just for beauty. Well, Dad realized that broom making was kind of unique in the fact that it never went from an old-fashioned craft to an art form. It basically went from a craft to an industrialized product that was being manufactured. There was never a real time period where there was a master broom maker exploring it as a craft. And so when Mr. Ogle took him on as an apprentice, my father kind of cherished that and realized that it was maybe his job to carry this on and to explore brooms as an art form. A lot of folks give my father credit from taking the broom from the floor and making it beautiful enough to hang on the wall. And that's where we are today with brooms. I still like functional art, and I try to make brooms that can be used, but oftentimes I make brooms that are just beautiful and just, something that's going to be a gorgeous piece on the wall. But we still harken back to that heritage. And around this area, broom making was very common. And in fact, I have a broom here that this was a homemade broom and by a local broom maker. I do not know, but somebody had lived in Candler and had found this broom and that had been in their family. And it was traditional to do a broom round like this. It was very common. This is when it's actually made of broom corn, very simply wrapped and bound together. And honestly, Dad always said there's no right or wrong way to make a broom. As long as the fuzzy end's down and it holds together, that's a broom. It just had to work. It didn't matter what it looked like. And as long as it was a functional piece, that's what was most important. So as we go along, Dad started to explore more. And he came up with other designs. This is kind of a famous piece that my father is seen holding, and it was one of his early creations where he was experimenting with color and shape and form and taking brooms a little bit in a different direction, tying a broom backwards. Nobody had heard of that sort of thing, and this was just strictly an art piece. And, this was the 70s, so some things were a little gaudy, and we have some really, some avocado green brooms and some harvest gold, but Dad never let a little bit of tackiness bother him at all, and he could definitely throw it out there. But it was more importantly about exploring the art form, and he loved to experiment with brooms, and that's where he found most of his joy. And he started to bring, this craft, and he, is, known as a broom maker all these years, but he was really an innovator, and he was. I'd like to say he was kind of a recovering scientist, but he really loved the craft and he loved to see it promoted. And at the time when he first learned broom making, a lot of these old crafts, if your family made a living doing this, you didn't share your family secrets because that was kind of your trade. You know, you didn't want to impinge upon what you were doing. So to have Mr. Ogle teach him, Dad realized that was a gift, a real gift outside his own family. And so, but Dad, realized that these crafts are going to die out. And so he made it his mission to teach as many people as he could and to pass the skill on. And, growing up, I must admit, though, this was a bit of a chore in my family. My dad expected us to come home, my brothers and I, do our homework, and then help Dad in the broom shop until supper time. It was often third grade, I think, before I realized that the other kids did not have to go to school and come home from school and make brooms like we did. I just didn't know we were different for the longest time. That was, just normal in my family. And so as a teenager, I rebelled. I didn't want to be a broom maker, and I ran off to college as fast as I could. I got my degrees in architecture and industrial design, and my father tricked me after graduation. He said he needed help in the family business, and I didn't have an internship lined up, and I was thinking about grad school, and I said, fine, old man, I'll give you one summer. That was 28 summers ago now. I fell back in love with it. I found that joy that my father had found all those years ago, and now I carry on the family tradition. And I have two boys of my own, and they are both really talented broom makers. Now, whether or not they do it as a career, that's up to them, but they both know how, and they both have the skill to pass this down to the next generation. So that's what we're hoping to do with a lot of these old crafts, is to, carry down the skills and then to make sure that they're carried on somewhere. But when we get a break and a chance, we can go over some of these other brooms here. But I brought some of my more modern ones here. I'll show you one other broom here. This one is one I'm rather proud of. This is a wedding broom design that I came up when my wife Diana and I got married. And during our engagement, I made her a special broom very similar to this. And it was one of the few brooms that I could point to and say, I made that. And because Dad had been doing it for a number of years, and a lot of brooms that I would come up with, he already had made. Or he'd say, oh, I got a picture here of a broom that looks really similar to that. But this design I was very proud of to do. And it's kind of one of my signature pieces now. As Dad had his signature pieces, I have my own signature pieces. I think it's a wonderful craft, and it's got a lot of roots in this area just because people were so isolated. They were still making brooms by hand here long after the Industrial Revolution. Some of the history of broom making, as it was passed down, Ben Franklin, of course, is given a lot of credit with introducing us to the material, but eventually a man by the name of Levi Dickinson was right around in the 1700s. He was growing sorghum. He was a sorghum entrepreneur. He was growing the seed for food and for the animals, and he started breeding out a tassel that was really fine for broom making, and taking the rougher sorghum that had been introduced and turning it into a longer, nicer tassel, and would bound the brooms together and start selling them. He made a little enterprise with it, and he was one of the first to make some of the first broom equipment and to start making the brooms in a larger scale and making them for sale. Because oftentimes these were just things that were made at home, especially in these areas. But he was the first to really start working with this new broom corn material and developing it. Eventually, though, the shaking Quakers got a hold of the brooms, and what they're known for is turning the brooms flat. Most of the brooms were done round, like the old one I showed you here. I have a broom here that we do believe was made at the Pine Mountain Settlement School. And this one was one that was hand-wrapped and was done round in the old style. And quite often, the round brooms were allowed to bend, and it was just sort of a side-to-side swishing motion with them when you swept with them. They're not quite what we think of as the flat brooms, but the shaking Quakers, those shakers, started spreading the brooms out flat, and they really revolutionized broom making and started coming up with different designs for making them by wrapping them with wire and getting away from this woven pattern. We call this pattern, this weaving, is a very simple, plaiting here, but that was more of a lot of shaker influence that came back down here into the mountains. Traditionally, though, the man who taught my father did a bark tie. The Ogle family is known for their bark ties. This is an ogle broom made by Lee Ogle, and this is one with a what they call a Bo Peep on there. He made this special design that would come around, and this is very indicative of a Gatlinburg-style broom here in the Appalachian Mountains. And you can tell the way he stitched it. They had very with a cross-stitch pattern and using this little bark design. Originally, this bark would have been hickory or poplar bark cut into strips. It was often the same material that they would cane chairs with. And broom making and chair caning and basket weaving, they're all kith and kin. If you could weave a basket, you could figure out how to make a broom. If you knew how to cane chairs, you could definitely come up with a way to make a broom. But there's, like I said, there's no right or wrong way to make a broom, and especially back then, as long as it worked, that was all that mattered. So I'll leave it at that with Dad, and then we'll talk a little about some of this material of the tools we use, and then we'll open up for a little question and answer.
Just a couple of interjections. Prior to the brooms being flattened, they were called besoms. And so all of the round brooms have been called besoms, and then the Quakers began to make them flat at some point in time. You've heard the word Ben Franklin and Virginia, and we think that the Virginia connection was Thomas Jefferson because Ben Franklin and Jefferson were friends, lived around the same time, and Franklin got his broomcorn from Virginia, and we think that it might have come from Thomas Jefferson, because if you've ever been to Virginia and Thomas Jefferson's home, he was fascinated by all of the different kinds of plants, and possibly, quite possibly, the broomcorn came from Thomas Jefferson and his farm area. So those two interjections. And then we wanted to talk about some of the different tools. Marlow knows some of the history, but these are two knives that I have, and you can talk about them and some of the other kinds of tools.
These were broom knives or broom hammers. They were actually a combination, kind of a breaking tool to break up the fiber. When they first started wrapping brooms with wire, they would, in order to press it down, you kind of had to crease it a little bit, and this tool would help crease it. It also had a flat side for driving a small tack into the hammer, into the handle, and then you could crease the broom as it was being wrapped onto the machine, breaking it with the sharper end here, and then you basically could whack it all down and pinch it tight with this tool. It was basically a broom maker's hammer, a broom knife, and a rather beautiful find here. This is definitely an old one that's been around a long time, and it's probably made hundreds of brooms in its lifetime. By wrapping it with wire, you could make brooms pretty much 10 times faster than you could do by hand. And so the broom machine, unfortunately, it was a great invention. It was a little too good. A lot of broom makers suddenly went from crafters, artisans to machine operators almost overnight with the Industrial Revolution. And it was, thankfully, places like this that were so isolated that they were still making the brooms by hand. But the old kick winding machines, you'll see some of those still around, and people doing them with a call a squirrel cage or a kicker. And it was just a simple device to wrap wire tightly on the handle, and this tool right here would help with that process, most definitely. When you finish a broom, you have to even it up at the ends, and so quite often they will trim them off at the bottom if you're going to make a broom that's going to be cropped. This was a homemade cropper my dad made the first year he made brooms. 2 2x4s and a machete with a single blade, and would chop the broom right off. This was probably the simplest tool that we had. It was super dangerous, and I'm surprised none of us kids ever lost a finger on this thing. I used to take it to class and show my students. Now I leave it on the shelf at home, but for many years this was used to trim our brooms. I have a silage cutter now, which is actually an old tool that they used to cut up the cane and make the silage out of, and I use that as my broom cropper when I'm working on them. But sometimes I'll break out a little PVC pipe cutter and trim my brooms with that. So a good sharp knife and a serrated knife will go a long way to trimming up brooms. I've seen Peter with his knife cutting apart many brooms, but there's lots of little tools, but the idea was very few of the tools were exclusionary. You did not need a special tool to make brooms. They were things that you could come up with, things that so many people found different ways to do. And the broom tool that I use the most is probably a foot wheel, a simple bobbin that holds my string and I pull up against. And Peter has one outside in his demo area. When we get done, we invite you guys to come out and see what we're doing. But that we pull up against and he can bind it tight. It's just a simple piece of just a simple spool that holds the string. And but in the Foxfire books, they talk about taking a bundle of cord, throwing it over exposed beam, and putting a loop in it, and then standing on that loop and pulling down with your weight. And that was another way to tension a broom. So there are so many different ways, and it fascinates me, region by region, county by county, there are different ways to make brooms. And some of these are, kind of combined and lost to history, but we're doing our best to try to sort it all out. The thing about brooms is a lot of the old brooms are gone simply because people use them. They weren't cherished items like quilts or coverlets or weavings. They were something to use up, and when you used it up, you threw it out or you tied a new broom on it. And so an old handle could have many brooms in its lifetime, but oftentimes the older brooms, when they got worn down, they were simply chucked and thrown into the fire and start fresh. But there is a lot of history and folklore with brooms, and a lot of superstition around brooms as well. But brooms are always considered good luck, really. A lot of folks would take a broom, and when you went to a new home, the first housewarming present you were supposed to bring was a pound of salt, a loaf of bread, and a brand new broom. And that was supposed to bring good luck to the homeowner. And of course, we talk about in the slave tradition, they would jump the broom in their wedding ceremonies. And there's a couple other traditions. There's a Celtic hand fasting ceremony that has a bit of broom jumping, but the movie Roots in the 1970s showed a broom jumping, and it has really popularized the idea of jumping the broom. So that wedding broom there that I designed has been very popular for folks who want a very special broom, an heirloom piece to jump over the broom with. So I think brooms are very therapeutic. There's something about them. They're always associated with, setting up a household, good luck and cleanliness. I think there's nothing quite like a good broom. And a lot of folks will say that. Nothing sweeps like a good broom either. A lot of folks will, in the islands and the Gullah culture, they would hang brooms by the doors and windows, and it was supposed to keep out the evil spirits. There's a tradition of the boo hag or the slipskin hag down in South Carolina in the Low Country, and the boo hag would come and bother you at night as you slept, and it was a witch that could slip out of her skin and come and basically would ride you through the swamps while you slept like a horse. And so if you woke up and you were more tired than you went to bed, you would say you were hag-ridden. And to prevent being hag-ridden and have a good night's sleep, you always hung a broom by the door or the window. And I guess witches are OCD, and they would have to come and count the bristles of every single bristle in the broom before they could enter, and it would kept them busy all night until the sun rose up, and then you were fine. So brooms were good protectors. So if you have somebody bothering you, it's not a bad idea to hang a broom by the door and keep them away for a while. There's all sorts of neat traditions, and I guess because brooms have been around so long, and everybody's had brooms in every culture, that there are a lot of cultures and folklores and traditions that go with broom making. One quick thing here. I tell people I've been making brooms since I was 5, but actually I ran across a picture. Here I am at 3 years old, holding up some broom cord, wearing my NASA space launch hat that my dad got me, and helping make brooms. I say I helped, but I probably wasn't much good until I was 10 or 12 before I started to make brooms that could be of any use to the family. But I did grow up with it every day for the longest time. Peter, what else we got? I think we got time for some questions and answers. How are we doing on time?
We're kind of on.
Okay.
Okay. Questions, all right? Yes.
Yeah. Well, there is... Unfortunately, that's a little R-rated, and I will let you Google that, and you can find out that it is a tradition that dates back to a time when certain cultures would basically there were ways to. They were basically people were especially medicine women and people who were dealing in herbs and potions and basically unguents, they would come up. A broom was used as a way to get high, and so literally people who were riding the broom were getting high and flying around, and were in an altered state. And so quite often they got called witches because of this. And yes, Puritan folks did not care for that at all. But yes, I will let you Google the true answer on that. But yes, it got associated with witches. And and the funny part is, right now, that is a huge part of my demographic of people I sell to are people who like Harry Potter and witches. And so I've come up with my traditional round broom here in a more fashionable size. So it's very aerodynamic. I tell people my dad was a rocket scientist, so we definitely know how to make brooms a little more aerodynamic. But yes, if you're going to fly first class, I tell people. Other questions?
Yeah, I've got one question. On the wedding broom that you designed, I noticed that one side of the handle is straight and one is very twisted. Is there any semblance or reason for that?
No, not really. This just happens to be that particular piece. It can be, as long as it's a forked broom, a double broom, I can make a wedding broom on it. This just happened to have one that had the honeysuckle vine.
Makes it more artistic.
Exactly.
Twisted side was the man on the
Well, that is up to you as to see which one. I was going to say whoever's a little more twisted. And it's funny. I tell people that broom handles are like people. The more they go through in their life, the more character they have. And for some reason, I'm attracted to people who are a little twisted. So if you're a little crooked, twisted, or bent, you're my kind of person. You got character. So the more character, the better.
I had a question about you mentioned broom corn and then sorghum. Are you saying the same?
So yes, broom corn is sorghum vulgare. It is a special variety of sorghum. So it is in the sorghum family, but it is a sorghum that is been bred out to be longer and have long seed peduncles, which is the part of the broom corn that connects to the tassel. And so where the stalk and the tassel meet, the broom corn has very long fiber. So it's a special sorghum. So it is a type of sorghum, and it will crossbreed with other sorghum. So if you plant it separately. But it's neat stuff. And we brought some seeds today. And if anybody would like to plant their own broom corn, I've got little bags of seeds for anybody who'd like some, and you can pick them up outside when Peter and I are working out there and doing our demo. No, this variety does not produce a lot of sugar, so it's good for brooms, but that's about it. The chickens will eat it. Ben Franklin said it was good for feeding the fowl, but it's not a very good syrup product. There's other varieties of sorghum that are much sweeter. The sorghum vulgare is tough and lanky. It's a hard worker, but it's not very sweet.
If you look at all of the brooms, none of them really have very much seed in them. And the way to take the seed out is to use a rake of some kind. Sometimes it's steel. This picture has it made out of wood, but you slap a few pieces down at one time, pull it through the rake, and the seed drops out. And then what's left is a stiff bristle. What I'd also like to talk about quickly is when sorghum is growing, when the tassel emerges from the plant, you do what is called tabling, which means to bend it over at the first notch, and then as the broom corn continues to emerge, it's growing downward, which keeps all the fibers together. And then when you rake it out, all of the fibers stay together, and you don't have very much problem with it splaying out and causing a problem. It's all together. So you table the broom corn when the tassel emerges from the plant.